On this episode of How to Make Dinner, I'm making the most festive and delicious dessert that is totally impractical, and it makes no sense that I'm making it, but I'm doing it anyway. Since it's the holiday festive season, I wanted to take this opportunity to show you my family's very favorite Christmas dinner dessert. And there's no reason for me to make this year. It's totally supposed to be for a big group of people. And it's a mincemeat trifle, which probably either excites you a lot or grosses you out a lot. If you're like my friend Heather, who hates raisins, you're not into this. But if you're like me, you love it. I say this is impractical for me to make because A, it's intended to be made for a large group of people, which we don't have this year, obviously. B, I didn't even own a trifle dish. So I went out and bought this just for this episode, which is I would say it's very off-brand for me, out of character to buy a dish that is only good for one thing. Although we did realize this would also be great for layered salads, so stay tuned for those. Another reason me making this mincemeat trifle is totally impractical is because it calls for this stuff, Grand Marnier, which I don't even really like it in any other application. I only ever use it in this trifle, which means I only ever use it once a year. And because I'm usually making this dessert with my mom, she usually does all the buying of the fancy, expensive booze and everything else. So I guess I feel like a real grown-up now because I'm buying my own Grand Marnier for the mincemeat trifle. Let's get into what you need to make this trifle. You need some kind of plain cake. I've got a store-bought vanilla pound cake here, but you can really use any cake. I've used like regular vanilla sponge cake. I've used angel food cake. Really just something to soak up a bunch of saucy, boozy stuff. You also need mincemeat, which I have made my own quite a bit, but I didn't this year. I actually bought whatever brand was on the shelf at my grocery store yesterday. And I love mincemeat. I'm sure I'll go through this whole jar, no problem. You need Grand Marnier, like I said earlier. You also need custard. I made this from scratch, but you can definitely use store-bought custard or like Bird's custard powder, which I have a special soft spot for. I'll show you how I made this custard in a few minutes. And then you need whipped cream, which I whipped a little earlier, but because I whipped it earlier, I'm gonna just give it one more final little like refresh whip in a few minutes. And you need canned mandarin oranges, which is super weird. And yeah, they're not as good as fresh oranges, but for some reason, I just feel like they're the thing you need here. They're like slippery and they don't have any like skin on them. They're just kind of sweet. They're just what goes in this trifle. If you wanted to go in, get oranges and segment them yourself, that's totally fine. It'll be a little different, but I'm fine with it. I use canned mandarin oranges because they're just what I like in this application. So I'm gonna start making it now, finally. Before we get layering, we need to cut this cake up. It's a bit of a Tetris game. So I'm gonna start by cutting it in half. And then I know that I have each half is good for its own layer. So I'll kind of treat it that way. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I think I could probably fit 6 pieces in there. So I guess we're going for like a 2-layer thing. You can do more than that. You can do lots of layers if you want. Now it's just a matter of assembling. So starting with a layer of cake in the bottom. You can also rip pieces up to fill in the gaps if you want really perfect layers. It's a great little technique. I might do that actually. You know, we might get 3 layers out of this because this trifle dish is nice and narrow. That's a pretty solid layer. Next is a good bath of Grand Marnier right over the cake pieces. I like to use my thumb as a bit of a stopper here. Just a sprinkle. I mean, you can use as much as you want. It's up to you and how boozy your guests are. And if you wanted to make this booze free, you could definitely do just orange juice in the sponge instead. And then mincemeat. And I'm not measuring anything, I'm just guessing. I'm gonna put a couple of big blobs here, see how far that takes us. And whenever I'm doing anything layered, I always kind of push it all out to the outside first, so I know I get all the way out there. More than that. You don't want tons though. You don't want it to be like a thick layer. You just want it to be there. Mincemeat is pretty impactful flavor-wise. Ooh, yeah, nice. Can't believe we're having this for dessert tonight. That's looking pretty good. The next layer is the custard. This custard's pretty easy. I made it earlier today. It's just egg yolks, cornstarch, sugar, and milk. And the main thing with any custard is that you don't want to scramble the eggs. So I took the egg yolks and the cornstarch and the sugar and whisked them together first. And then I heated the milk in a jug in the microwave for like 2.5 minutes until it was quite hot. And then ever so slowly drizzled the milk into the yolk mixture. That'll make sure that your eggs don't scramble. Once all the milk is in, you kind of have to cook the custard until it thickens up. So you can either do that by pouring the whole mixture back into the measuring jug and heating it in bursts in the microwave, or you can keep the whole thing in a pot like I did and just whisk slowly over medium heat until the whole mixture thickens up. And it'll be like runny, 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 and then suddenly super thick. So you want to stay with it. Don't go running off doing any errands or anything. And then once the custard is thickened, I just poured it back into the original measuring jug because I don't want to get too many dirty dishes going on. And I covered it with a little piece of parchment paper just so that it didn't form a skin, and then just chilled it in the fridge for a while. Like I made it this morning and this is evening now, so at least a few hours I'd say until the custard is fully cold. Okay, so cake layer, Grand Marnier, sprinkle, mincemeat. Now in with the custard. And it looks kind of lumpy, but that's just because it's cold. I'm putting about, a third to half of the custard into this layer. And then comes the mandarin oranges. I'm curious to know how many of you grew up with canned mandarin oranges. I feel like they're such like a childhood thing for some people. They're actually not for me at all, except for with this trifle, but canned peaches, that was my thing. So you don't need a full layer of oranges, just kind of a scattering. I don't know how much of this can I'll use. Maybe the whole can. They're not that big. And it is like one of the best parts, because what happens is you get all this rich, custard, really flavorful, powerful mincemeat. And then you have this snappy, kind of sweet, juicy orange to bite into. All right, and then we just repeat the process. So maybe we'll do this next layer and fast forward. final layer is just a big kind of giant cloud of whipped cream on the top. I think so many trifles end in whipped cream, right? So I whipped this earlier and I added just a little bit of icing sugar and a little splash of vanilla. Not too much sugar because I don't want it to be too sweet because we've got a pretty sweet situation on the go. So, but because I whipped it earlier, it's kind of like melted a tiny bit. So I'm just gonna give it a little re-whip. An extra 30 seconds of whipping and it's pretty much perfect now. I love a soft whip. I don't like it when whipped cream is too stiff. I do have a couple things to say about whipping in general, or mixing anything using electric beaters like I did to whip this cream earlier. You gotta stop grinding the side of the bowl with the beaters. Every single person I see baking, mixing cake batter or whipping cream or whatever, it's always accompanied by this terrible sound of like the beaters just scraping the side of the bowl. You have to hold it kind of above. The beater should really just hover like angels whipping your cake batter or your cream. Like, you really don't need to be grinding the sides of the bowl. The other little trick with whipping cream or really anything is if you find that you're needing a hand to whip and a hand to do something else, it's really handy to put a little cradle around your bowl with like a towel, tea towel, or anything you've got around. Just really helps keep the bowl in place so that you can whip and beat and like add ingredients or do whatever you need to do. So that's a hot tip. Anyway, this cream is perfect, I think. And I'm just gonna slap it on top with another spoon. I'm sure that in the 70s, this was definitely done in some kind of pattern, but I'm a bit of a minimalist when it comes to decor, both in desserts and in life. You might have seen our little minimalist Christmas tree we've got going on this year. I'm pretty into it. Basically, there was a dead branch on the side of the road that looked like it was a cool shape, and it has become our Christmas tree. If you wanted a little bit more orange flavor on this, you could certainly like grate a little orange zest over it if you wanted, but I think I'm just gonna leave it like that. So nice. Look at that. That's my family's favorite mincemeat trifle. I know this isn't the usual weekday easy dinner solution kind of material I usually share on this channel. This is more of a once a year, if you feel like going overboard, make this out of control trifle. But I hope you liked it, and I hope that maybe you even will make it. And let me know if you do, because I think I would lose my mind if I found out that a whole bunch of people were making the mincemeat trifle for Christmas. I don't know anyone who does at this point. I think that the original recipe did come from like some women's magazine, probably in the 70s. That's it for this episode. I've got my trifle and I've got my nice glass of red wine, so I feel like I've got everything I need to feel festive and full of holiday cheer. Thanks so much for joining me this week to make this trifle with me, and thanks for coming back week after week. It really, really means a lot. And thanks for hitting the like button if you did so, and thanks for subscribing if you're subscribed. And I look forward to seeing you next week. I forgot to mention, when you make the trifle, it's best to let it sit for at least a couple hours before you eat it and before you kind of spoon into it. If you can make it the morning before you're gonna eat it or the morning of, it'll be great.